And Asha Logos wrote the foreword in Jan Ott's book, Codex Oera Linda. They always seem to partner up. Ott has a YouTube channel called Oera Linda. And if you look at his playlist, you can see that he recently was interviewed by Catherine Austin Fitts. In the interview, she asked Ott if the OLB could be a hoax. He didn't give a very convincing answer as to why it wasn't a hoax. Maggie and their cohorts would love for Fryans to think the book is a hoax because they know how important the book really is. So Ott was on with Fitz, and before that he was a guest on Red Ice Radio, otherwise known as Fed Ice, which is another honeypot to attract the newly awakened so they can control what information they get. And then we have this interview of Ott, where the positioning of the book in front of the interviewer is very staged. He's seeing with his left eye, the left-hand path, the sinister path. And here, juxtaposed by 1984's Now. Strange placement? We know that George Orwell tried to warn us in his book titled 1984 about the New World Order. William R. Sandbach.
Huzzah!
And although I don't trust Sefer, Asha Logos, or Ott's interpretations of the OLB, I do trust William R. Sandbach's translation. Alwyn J. Raubenheimer.
Huzzah!
And I do trust the work of Alwyn J. Raubenheimer, who also trusted William R. Sandbach's translation and used it in his book, Chronicles from Pre-Celtic Europe, comparing the translations. So after reading both versions, Sandbach's in Raubenheimer's book and Ott's, I found some peculiar places where the translations differed and changed the meaning of the stories. I came to the conclusion that one translation is authentic and is passing down the true history of the Fryan race to warn their future brethren, while the other is a watered-down universalist book, taking out all the biblical connections and clouding the references of the very people that are the Fryans' enemies to this day. These differences I want to share with you here. The photos of the book I will be showing you are from Raubenheimer's, but I do have Ott's and will be quoting from it. First, I wanted to mention that, for people saying that Raubenheimer would have approved of Ott's translation, here is proof that that is not the case. He was good with Sandbach's version and only slightly edited the translation. He writes, "Some editing was done where it was felt that Sandbach's translation does not reflect the original Frisian meaning. You will see that in the places that I take issue, Raubenheimer did not change the meaning from the original, while Ott did." The Magi. One of the most important differences that I saw was how Ott changed Maggie, or Magyarar, Maggie for short, from the original text, to Magus in his translation. By doing this, we lose the connection from the Maggie of the Oera Linda time to the Maggie of the present. The Maggie of the OLB is the same Maggie that is trying to wipe out Frya and rule the world today. There is no reason to change the actual word in the OLB, Maggie, to a different spelling, unless someone wanted to hide their identity. And how important is it to show this connection in translations of the OLB, which Raubenheimer clearly did, and Ott clearly did not? Ever wonder why Trump's motto was, "Make America Great Again"? MAGA is for the Magi, his overlords. Now let's look at another important example. cows with golden horns. We can see in Raubenheimer's version that it says, when the Magi got sniff of this, he took the most attractive of his Finns and Magyarar and promised them cows with golden horns to let them be taken in, employed, by our people in order to spread his doctrines. In Odd's version, he changes the lines to read, when the Magas comprehended this, he selected the best looking of his Finns and Magyars and promised them mountains of gold if they could find acceptance among our people and then spread his doctrine. He does put a subnote at the bottom saying mountains of gold, literally cows with golden horns expression, but why do that? Why don't you just leave it like it said and then let everyone else figure out what that is? Cows with golden horns would have us once again associate the Magi of Scandinavia with the Magi of the Middle East, their Bible and their golden calf worship of Moloch. What do we see out in front of Wall Street, New York? The same cow with golden horns, still worshipped by the same Magi. So don't you think Ott should have left the translation as is and not change it to mountains of gold? Unless someone wanted to hide their identity. Our earliest history. Now let's move on to the Fryan's creation story. You will notice it is about 3 races. Now let's look at this sentence translated by Raubenheimer. This is our earliest history. WR.ALDA, who alone is good and eternal, made the beginning. Then came time. Time wrought all things, also the earth. In Odd's version, the line reads, this is our primal history. WR.ALDA, who alone is whole and eternal, created the potential. Time began and wrought all things, the very earth itself. So we can see that Raubenheimer stayed with Sandbach's translation of the beginning, and Ott changed it to the potential. So why would Ott change the word beginning to the word potential? Who uses the potential? The same Magi priests that we have been discussing. Are you surprised? It is used in the Kabbalah, specifically in the Zohar, which is a section of the Talmud. And here we read their version of the beginning. Chakma means the potential of what is. So you can see that by inserting potential into the story of our earliest history, the Magi are inserting themselves into it. Now let's go further down page 351 in Raubenheimer's book, where we read, after the 12th Yule festival, she, Earth, gave birth to 3 maidens, Lyda out of glowing, Finda out of hot, and Frya out of warm dust. When the last came, WR.ALDA breathed his breath upon her, in order that men should be bound to him. When she was full grown, she took pleasure and delight in the visions of WR.ALDA. Hatred entered them. They each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters every Yule time, too. From this came all mankind. Now let's see how Ott translated these lines. He writes, after the 12th Yule feast, she bore 3 girls, Lyda from glowing hot, Finda from hot, and Frya from warm substance. As they lay naked, WR.ALDA fed them with his breath, so that mankind would be bound to him. As they matured, they became fruitful and dreamed of pleasure. They received WR.ALDA's OD into them, and so they each bore 12 sons and 12 daughters, twins each Yuletide. All of mankind came from these. I couldn't find odd in Afrikaans, Dutch, German, or West Frisian. But in English, we have odd, which would be the opposite of even. And later, Eva was too sacred to say, so they would say even for good. The opposite of even is odd. The opposite of good is bad. Therefore, odd would represent bad or hate coming into the world. Ad trad Rabina. Sandbach took it from the Latin, which means hatred, and so Raubenheimer kept Sandbach's translation as hatred entered them. Now, if only Frya received the breath of WR.ALDA.S morals and laws within her heart, then it wouldn't be believed that the other two were jealous and thus hatred entered them, right? So the hatred entered Lyda and Finda because Frya got WR.ALDA.S breath, right? Hatred entered them is exactly what happens. And it makes sense that this is a part of the earliest history because they are teaching their Fryan brethren that it is in Lyda's and Finda's nature to hate Fryans. It's in their nature to hate Fryans. So this is a warning to Fryans, a very important warning. If you go with Ott's interpretation, he has WR.ALDA put the breath in all races equally and doesn't differentiate them, meaning he puts a universalist spin on the earliest history. Also, if we just look at the grammar, we see that hja, HJA, is she. That is singular. So it couldn't be talking about all three getting WR.ALDA.S breath. The first, the second, and then the last. It is the last that gets his special breath. She took pleasure in his delight, not they took pleasure. So once again, he is still talking about Frya, the last. And if we look at Ott's translation once again, they receive WR.ALDA.S odd into them, would imply that WR.ALDA had sex with them. Yet if we look on page 226 of Ott's book, Codex Oera Linda, he translates this sentence by the Berg matron Ricca this way. Because they have borne children, they have themselves called mother, but they forget that Frya bore children without being with a man. So Ott is contradicting his translation. WR.ALDA could not put his odd into the three original mothers, and at the same time, one of the mothers, Frya, bore children without being with a man. Raubenheimer's version makes much more sense. Also, remember the word odd and how it is the opposite of even? Well, here we have troubled as uneven. Uneven would be odd, once again proving that ad trad Rabina does mean hatred entered them. So I hope I've convinced you to at least be a bit more cautious when reading and watching things on the Oera Linda book, and I hope it has inspired you to take another read of it, to really study it. So ultimately, we should see that language does matter. Translations do matter. They change the purpose of the story.